Okay, it is 6:30. I'm going to call the meeting to order, please. I would like to first note happy birthday to Champaign County, which was started 187 years ago today. Happy birthday, Champaign County. Will the clerk call the roll, please?
Fears,
Here.
Furtado,
Here.
Goss,
Here.
Harper,
Here.
Ingram,
Present.
McGuire,
Here.
Patterson,
Here.
Rector,
Here.
Storr,
Present.
Summers,
Here.
Taylor,
Here.
Thorsland, Tinsley,
Present.
Wolkin, Young,
Here.
Clemens, here, Court, Dillard Meyer, Eisenman,
Here.
Esri,
Here.
Rosales.
Here.
Okay, we have a quorum. The meeting is moving on. Tonight's prayer is from John Bailey from a Diary of Private Prayer. My failure to be true, even to my own accepted standards, my self-deception in the face of temptation, my choosing of the worst when I know the better, O Lord, forgive. My failure to comply myself to the standards of conduct I demand of others, my blindness to the suffering of others, and my slowness to be taught by my own, my complacence toward wrongs that do not touch my own case, and my oversensitiveness to those that do. O Lord, forgive. My slowness to see the good in my fellows and to see the evil in myself, my hardness of heart toward my neighbor's faults, and my readiness to make allowance for my own, my unwillingness to believe that you have called me to a small work and my brother to a greater one. O Lord, forgive. Let's rise for the pledge, please. Okay, will the clerk read the notice of the meeting, please?
Notice is hereby given that a regular meeting of the County Board, Champaign County, Illinois, will convene on February 20th, 2020, 6:30 p.m. in the Lyle Shields Meeting Room, Brookins Administrative Center, 1776 East Washington Street, Urbana, Illinois, in said county for the purpose of allowing and ordering payments of claims against the county, receiving and acting upon reports of committees, and such other matters as may be brought before said meeting, which said meeting shall continue in session from day to day until the completion of said business.
Thank you. Can I get approval of the agenda, please? Mr. Summers?
I'll make sure I'm doing this.
Mr. Young?
Okay.
Mr. Goss?
Yeah, I'd like to remove item F3 off of the consent agenda.
Okay.
So it's finance F3.
It's on page 60 in your
It's on
packet.
page
And you
60.
should have another form, which is in yellow at your table, to replace that one. It's the reason we're taking it off the agenda is because the numbers changed. Anything else? Any other discussion? Mr. Summers?
I'd like to move, let's see, that would be item 11.
Off of the consent agenda?
Off, no, item 11 off of our formal agenda to, I would be, make it item 15. That would move our executive session to the end of this meeting rather than having it in the middle.
Okay. Can I get a second for that?
Second.
Mr. Storr, okay. Discussion? Let me just say our attorney will be coming for that. We do have outside attorneys coming that we pay, so the longer they have to wait, okay.
Understood.
Okay, those in favor of moving that off the, I guess, moving it to a different place in the agenda?
Aye.
Those opposed? I guess we need a hand vote here. Those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay, the motion, those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Motion carries. Okay, we will move that item to the back of the agenda. All right, date and time of our next regular meeting. Oh, I'm sorry, we got to approve the agenda. With those changes, are we ready to approve the agenda? Okay, those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Date and time of the next regular meetings are outlined in your agenda. The committee meetings were all meeting this month. There is no study session planned for March 24th. We're now up to public participation, and I do have several folks tonight that would like to speak. First on the list is Ms. Tammy Fruehling-Vogus. Yeah, come up to the microphone and just push the middle button down. You can see a light up. And try to speak directly into the mic as close as you can get.
All right. My name is Tammy Fruehling-Vogus, and I am the mayor of St. Joseph. My address is 407 North 3rd, St. Joseph, Illinois. You'll have to excuse my voice this evening. I've slowly but surely been losing it all day long, so I hope I can get through this. And forgive me for the cough drop that I have too. So if it sounds like I have something in my mouth, I do. So I apologize. I'm here, and as you know, I'm here to discuss the boundaries for the solar farms. You have 2 amendments to the solar farm ordinance on the agenda for this evening. And I am here actually representing St. Joseph and also Mahomet. Unfortunately, Mahomet's planner wasn't able to attend, and neither was the mayor, so I told them I would speak up for them also. But we just basically, and I'm speaking mostly from my heart, I'm not a professional planner, but being the mayor of St. Joe, this is critical to us. The ETJ is important for our planning. The village of St. Joe especially, we have 4 substations around our village, 2 to the south, 2 to the north. We have a railroad to the east. We have a river to the west. If we have solar farms within our half mile, up to our boundaries within a half mile, that leaves us a very small area to plan for our future, for our growth. And although St. Joe hasn't been growing in leaps and bounds here the last 10 years or so, but it has in the past. And I most certainly believe that St. Joe will again someday have some controlled growth to our village. Mahomet wanted to mention that they are also, what we would like to see is to pass the amendment with the 1.5 miles to regain that. Half mile is just a little too short for us to plan much for our future. Mahomet wanted to make mention that for their community especially, their growth within their ETJ has been crazy. I mean, you know how much Mahomet has been growing here in the last 5 years or more, and it's the significant growth that they have had within their planning boundary. And if they had had a large-scale solar farm placed within that 1.5 miles here in the last 5 years, it would have been, and all the solar farms have long-term leases, at least 40-year leases. That would have been very problematic for the city of Mahomet. It would be very problematic for the village of St. Joe if we had, and I know each farmer on both our north and the south has been approached by the solar farms. If they had all accepted and had all been approved, we would be landlocked between the river and the railroad and the solar farms. And the only thing that I have heard during this process is it has to do with money and infrastructure for the solar farms. tax dollars for municipalities are hard to come by. As you all know, being here on this county board, that it's hard for infrastructure growth. And if we had to work around a 20 or 40 acre solar farm to have our infrastructure for any kind of development beyond that half mile, it would be very difficult for us to achieve those goals. So I am just here to please ask you to consider. We normally have our ETJ for everything else. We are allowed that so that we can be a part of our to help with our planning for the future of our communities. And I just think it would be a good thing. I'd love to work with the county. I think it would be a good step so that we could work within the intergovernments of our between the county and the villages, so that when these solar farms do come, at least if we're able to sit at the table and discuss that 1.5 mile jurisdiction, that I'm not saying that we would be totally against solar farms necessarily, but at least we could put it within our planning process too, so that we could see that it works for our plans also. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Next this evening is Ron Koster. Just push the center. Yeah, there you go.
My name is Ron Kester. I live at 1209 West Oregon Street in Urbana. And I wanted to talk about the issue of jailing in Champaign County and over-incarceration. I know that the jail is something that we talk about off and on, but one of the problems with the jailing issue is that really the community doesn't know very much about it, and that's by design. Jailing and prisons are designed to be out of sight and out of mind. They're supposed to work in the background. And so for me, it's helpful to take a look at it and try to bring that information to you. Early this afternoon, I went to the sheriff's website where you can find everybody who's incarcerated, and I pulled the numbers, and I want to share those with you now. This evening, there are 215 people incarcerated in Champaign County. 140 of those people are currently located in the satellite jail next door. 43 of those people are in the downtown jail facility next to the sheriff's offices, and 32 of those people are on electronic monitor. Among those people who are in the two facilities, 147 people have bail amounts attached to their cases. So what does that mean? It means that when somebody is charged with a crime, the first thing that happens is they go before an arraignment court judge. And the arraignment court judge checks in with the state's attorney's office, checks in with the public defender, and then also talks to the defendant. And from that information and based on the charges, decides whether they should be free until they're done with the business with the state, or whether they need to be incarcerated. And when they need to be incarcerated, then they use a formula to decide how much the bail amount should be. And in practice, that means that if somebody can put forward 10% of the bail amount, then they can leave the jail and be free until their business with the state is done, right? So if they have a $10,000 bail, it means they have to come up with $1,000. They don't have to do it. Anybody can come up with $1,000, right? So when we talk about 147 people with bail amounts, we're talking about people who, in theory, could be free if that money was there. And if the county posted $54,000, which is a lot of money, but not as much as what we talk about when we talk about jail building. If the county posted $54,000, then 46 people would be free tomorrow morning. That would leave 137 people in the jail, and that's less than half capacity, right, for the jail. So what I think this illustrates is that with a very small policy change, having a bail fund for those people who have low bail amounts but can't afford to be free while they're awaiting trial, for a small policy change, we can change the complexion of this problem. Suddenly it becomes a problem that you don't have to go and look for large amounts of money for. You can actually have a small amount of money set aside and then make the population of a manageable size for one facility. And you know, I've made this argument over the last 3 or 4 months, and I bring the new statistics every single time, and they look about the same as what I presented tonight. You know, a small policy change can radically change the nature of the problem. And I sometimes worry that that sounds radical, right? It sounds radical for a county to say we're going to start posting bail amounts to let people out of jail. And so, just to make sure that you understand, this is not really a radical proposal, that this is the sort of thing that counties do to manage their situation and their jail problem. I want to make a reference to a document that the county paid for some years back, and this was from the Institute for Law and Policy Planning. When the county hired their services back in 2012, they were hired to evaluate the criminal justice and jailing situation in Champaign County and make recommendations about how it could be better. And on page 35 of that document, there's the following. The county should consider the use of inmate welfare funds or private loan funds to start a bond fund to support the release of indigent inmates to be released pre-trial. That was a recommendation they made, and you can find that on page 35. Exactly the recommendation that I'm talking about here was made by a professional consultant. That was given a priority of important, and it was given stage 1 status. Stage 1 status, according to this recommendation, was these policy-oriented or fundamental changes are critical to the criminal justice system's efficiency and should happen now or as soon as possible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next is Ben Jocelyn, and Emily, you wanted to speak at the same time? Emily McCowan.
Hi there, everybody. My name is Ben Jocelyn.
I'm Emily McCown.
I'm a member of the Social Action Committee of the Unitarian Universalist Church at Urbana-Champaign,
I'm the executive director of the Channing Murray Foundation.
and we're here tonight to read a letter that the members of both organizations have written and will submit to you by email later. Want to note quickly that the letter was written at a time when the jail population was slightly smaller than it currently is. So just take that into consideration as we begin here. Thank you very much.
Dear members of the Champaign County Board, we are writing to inform you that we support closing the downtown jail and staunchly oppose any jail proposal that increases the number of bed spaces beyond the current capacity of the satellite jail. First, we want to commend the intention to close the downtown jail. This is an undoubtedly positive move for the county and its people. Thank you. Second, we recognize that the people housed at the satellite jail should be in safe and humane conditions. We support making repairs and partitioning current space to ensure the safety, health, and lawful housing of those who are in the jail. We believe this can be accomplished without increasing the capacity of the satellite jail. We strongly oppose any increase in the satellite jail capacity for the following reasons. We understand that the national and state level attention that has been paid to mass incarceration and its racist implications has led to reforms that currently see our jail population dropping. We understand that the implications of this trend have yet to be fully realized. We expect the number of people being held in our jail to decrease further, given legislative and judicial changes currently being considered. Some projections have our jail population falling dramatically within a year. Right now, the current number of beds in the satellite jail is greater than the current number of jailed persons. So we already have enough space and will soon have too much. Paying millions of dollars for jail capacity that we don't currently need and that we will not need in the future is bad governance and fiscally irresponsible. We know that the recommendations put forward by the Champaign County Community Justice Task Force in 2013 have been mostly ignored or underfunded. To put more money into jail infrastructure after years of underfunding alternatives shows an unwillingness to move toward greater justice. This amounts to an endorsement of the current racist and classist policies. Incarceration has negative impacts on people's mental health. Therefore, the primary investment in mental health infrastructure in the county should not be located inside the jail. People who have mental health concerns need a non-carceral space operated by healthcare professionals. It does not bode well for the people in our community with mental health conditions if the only spaces we are willing to build for them are located within prison walls. We know that we have people in our jail who wouldn't be there if they were poor. Many people in jail are there because they cannot afford bail, as Ron was speaking about, though they have not been found guilty. Keeping people in prison because they are poor is not justice. Yet this is what the cash bail system is designed to do. We know that there are people who wouldn't be in jail if they were not black. The system was designed to be racist and does not need intentional racism to perpetuate itself. Looking at the numbers, over 50%, sometimes over 70% black prisoners in a county where black people comprise only 13% of the population is blatant racism. We urgently need to address this issue.
We understand that our current jail population is a higher percentage of our population than it has been for most of the county's history. We know that locally and nationally, jailing higher percentages of the population has not led to greater security for communities, nor is it a successful reform mechanism for individuals. We ask you to be leaders in acknowledging the failure of the contemporary justice system and to help to lead our county and nation into a more just future. The voters of this county strongly rejected a jail project of a smaller scale just a couple years ago. If you were to put forward a referendum for jail building, we will be a part of a mobilization that will defeat it. So while we support the closing of the downtown jail and its modifications of this and some small modifications of the satellite jail, the scope of the project being considered runs against good governance, it runs against the values of our faith, it runs against the values of our freedom and equality that are so intrinsic and foundational to the rights of all people. Please look for creative ways to spend tax dollars that keep people out of jail and contribute to a healthy community. New jail construction will not serve that end. Sincerely, the Social Action Committee of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Urbana-Champaign, Florence Kaplow, the minister of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Urbana-Champaign, and the Channing Murray Foundation. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you. Okay, next is Dottie Vera Weiss.
Good evening. Good to see you all again. I'm Dottie Vera Weiss. I live here in Urbana. And when I was here at the Committee of the Whole last week, I reviewed a number of the things that are going on in the community that are making a difference in how many people are likely ending up in jail, and some of the things that could be done by law enforcement or are being done. I didn't have the handout with me in a form that was ready to be shared. And so that's what I've just handed out this evening. There are a couple of things that I've added to it, and I'm going to just mention a couple of them. One is that if the major construction that's been discussed is done, it would require either a raise in taxes, such as the public safety tax, or it would require a bond, or both. Using the public safety tax to pay off the bond is one of the possibilities. The interest charges on that run into probably into the millions, although I don't have the exact details on it. So when you consider how money might well be spent, it's important to balance that out. And specifically, the idea of having people housed in other jails in surrounding areas is not a terrible thing to do. It's a reasonable thing to do, and if there are concerns about interaction between different individuals or communications between individuals, that's a much better way of preventing it than having them in different parts of the jail. One of the things that I didn't mention was that rental assistance funds for people who are homeless have been increased, have tripled in the county with a coordinated program between the Regional Planning Commission and the townships. And so This decreases the number of people that end up committing the crimes of poverty. The RPC, regarding reentry services, the RPC received $450,000 over 3 years for entry support. And as you know, the county and also the Mental Health Board are also helping some people in the reentry process. And that also is going to decrease the number of people who are likely to be arrested and potentially put in jail. As far as law enforcement is concerned, we know that there has been a reduction. It's about a 30% reduction from the 2-year average in 2012-2013 to the 2-year average for 2018 to 2019. This is a significant average, and so that's probably part of what otherwise we could expect with the various changes that are coming up, but that still leaves about a 30% average decrease that could be anticipated if a number of the potential reforms are put in place. Regarding pretrial services programs, about 6 years ago or so, after the ILPP report came out, what was intended as a pilot program of pretrial services was put in place, but it was stopped after 6 weeks, saying that it was not effective. In fact, that wasn't a real pilot program. That was about a quarter of a pilot program, because the way a pretrial services program works best is that you make arrangements for people to get out of jail with bail reductions and connection to services within the first 2 or 3 days, so that those people don't lose connections with their family, their jobs, and their housing. And this program was way under that. It was only it was working with people who were still in jail 5 or 6 or 7 days later, and it wasn't really given long enough to work and wasn't adequately staffed. So it's important not to be stopped on trying these reforms at this time. And also, there are a lot of other possibilities as substance abuse and mental health programs are improved, that were defunded under the Rauner administration. There will be a lot more opportunities, as well as some of the things that I mentioned last week. Thank you very much. There is hope.
Thank you. And we have one more person tonight, Jordan Humphrey.
All right. Thank you, esteemed members of the County Board. My name is Jordan Humphrey. Many of you know me. I reside at 980 Pomona Drive in District 5, and full disclosure, I'm on the ballot in November. But the reason I'm here today is because of an event that happened recently in my community. And I have problems talking about this with a straight face because it always gets me worked up. But on February 3rd, 33-year-old Ryan Allen Davis was shot and killed near the Harbor Estates Lane. This one hits me a little closer than a lot of the more recent events have, because I grew up with his brother. He went to same schools as I did for most of my curricular life. This makes the 5th, 6th, I don't even know how many act of violence in or around my community in the past as many weeks, really. I quite honestly feel sick when I try to keep track of how many times the corner of Kenwood and Springfield end up on the news, just a stone's throw away from the place where I went to high school. Jailing community members in crisis has never worked to stop the deaths. I'm 30 years old this June, and you can go back to the day I was born, and violence has been a part of my childhood experience in the Holiday Park neighborhood. Ignoring or relegating these events to the other ignores the fact that all too often, the person on the slab ends up being a brother or a friend. We as a community need to combat the systemic causes of this violence. poverty, lack of access to education, recidivism, lack of employment, lack of affordable housing, lack of access to health care, lack of access to addiction treatment, systemic racism, all of these contribute to this violence year after year after year, going back to my parents and my grandparents probably even. Building a bigger jail without programs to address these root causes of this violence doesn't solve anything, and will leave my grandchildren with the same headlines that we see today. My heart goes out to that family and to the families that have this year so far have been victim of this kind of violence. I would like to do everything I can to help them, and I hope as you work on the consolidation plans for this satellite jail and whatever that may take, form that may take over the next year or so, that you think about the human cost of a cell-centric plan for that jail. Think about the programs and the good that they can do. Because honestly, if we don't, it's just going to be another person on that slab a month from now or a week from now, and it's going to go on forever. Thank you, and I appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you. All right, seeing no further public participation, we will move on to the consent agenda. As you recall, we took off one item, and I need a motion to approve the consent agenda. Mr. Esri, Mr. Goss, any discussion? Mr. Storr.
Yes. Would somebody like to speak to the first item, the adoption of the Johnson Controls item?
I don't think that's in order.
This
Let's
is
have a
the
discussion.
consent agenda.
Okay.
So it's
All
been,
right.
you guys
need to
reviewed it
pull
at your
off.
committee of the whole,
All right.
unless you want to pull it off. Okay. All right, we ready to vote? Those in favor? I'm sorry, if this requires roll call, I'm sorry.
Fears?
Yes or no? Are you voting, voting for the consent agenda? Okay, yes.
Furtado?
Yes.
Goss?
Yes.
Harper?
Yes.
Ingram?
Yes.
McGuire?
Yes.
Patterson?
Yes.
Rector?
Yes.
Storr?
Yes.
Summers?
Yes.
Taylor?
Yes.
Thorsland?
Yes.
Tinsley?
Yes.
Young?
Yes.
Clemens?
Yes.
Clifford?
He's not here
Oh.
tonight.
Dillard Meyer?
Yes.
Eisenman?
Yes.
Esri?
Yes.
Rosales?
Yes.
Okay, motion carries. Next is approval of the minutes for the January 23rd, 2020 meeting. Can I have a motion?
What about communications?
Oh, I'm sorry, I totally missed it.
That's what me.
Bottom of the page. Yes, next is communications. Any
Thank
member
you.
of the
Thank
board have
you.
communications? Mr. Young?
Thank you very much, County Executive. I appreciate it. It's okay. Things happen. What did I write down? My communication will be brief, but once again, since being on this county board, I had come to the conclusion that its system and its practices and process has a lot of flaws in it and seriously need to be looked into in regards to how things are done and how decisions are made. And I'm not just talking about with voting alone, but how the county government is ran, along with behind-the-scenes activity that take place and also in our public meeting now. There is no real checks and balance system in place with this one-year-old form of government. Say that again, there is no checks and balance system in place with this one-year-old form of government. No language to really say how things are done correctly or not. There's a lot of ambiguities and open interpretation, which I think is done intentionally, or a lack of really knowing how to do things correctly, which is very dishonest toward taxpayers and how we use their money. Thank you very much.
Any other communication from the board? Mr. Esri?
Yes, thank you. I have two letters to read into the record. They're both dealing with the zoning ordinance, which Mayor Tammy Freeling Vogus spoke on. The first one is from Savoy Village President Joan Dykstra. This is in support of an amendment to Champaign County zoning ordinance requirements for a photovoltaic PV solar farm in section 6.1.5B of the Champaign County zoning ordinance by adding the following requirements for any PV solar farm that is located within 1 1/2 miles of a municipality. Requirements included in case 946-AT-19, including Part A to the zoning amendment increasing the minimum required separation between a PV solar farm and a municipal boundary from 0.5 to 1.5 miles. As a former county board member, I appreciate your understanding that the county board represents both incorporated and incorporated interests. The ability for uninterrupted growth and development is critical for the future of any municipality. Thank you for your consideration. And again, that was from Savoy Village President Joan Dykstra. The second one is from Charles Smith, Mayor, Village of Rantoul. To whom it may concern, the Village of Rantoul is very much interested in the direction Champaign County takes in regards to the county's zoning regulation of solar farms and other uses within the 1.5 miles of the village limits. The Village of Rantoul has an adopted comprehensive plan, and with that plan and our own zoning authority, we desire as much influence and control over zoning in the 1.5 mile extraterritorial jurisdictional area around our village corporate limits as we can possibly have. The Village of Rantoul understands that the current county requirements for solar farms allow their development up to within 0.5 miles of the village's corporate limits. There's currently no ability to protest or reasonable amount of time afforded to review the impact on our village and the future growth and development of our village. Our oversight and influence of the 1.5 mile ETJ area has been diminished, and our comprehensive planning within that 1.5 mile ETJ area has been made irrelevant. The Village of Rantoul supports the proposed amendment being brought forth by case 946-AT-19, which would increase the minimum separation between a solar farm and the municipal boundary from 0.5 miles to 1.5 miles. This amendment also sets review requirements to afford the village adequate notice and review time for such solar farm placements. The Village of Rantoul respectfully requests Champaign County to move forward with the approval of case 946-AT-19 in order to restore our ability to review and influence potential development and land usage within the entire 1.5 mile ETJ area afforded to the village. We thank you for your attention to this matter and look forward to improved intragovernmental cooperation between the village and the county on land use and development matters. Sincerely, Charles Smith, Mayor, Village of Rantoul.
Thank you. Any other communications for the board? Mr. Storr?
Thank you. Many long-serving members of the county board will remember Mr. David Laker. Mr. Laker had a spouse who was in the Champaign County nursing home and would regularly come to county board meetings and talk about the conditions and his concerns about the county nursing home. And he would always preface the remarks with, "What about Sue?" This was the name of his wife. Sue passed away, but I remember seeing Mr. Laker feed his wife, who lay on a gurney at the nursing home. Mr. Laker, to me, is an example of spousal fidelity that I found admirable, perhaps exemplary. I respectfully ask the board to pause for a moment of silence in the memory of this fine man. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other communications from the board? Mr. Rector?
Yeah, I'd just like to reiterate, I've known Dave Laker for about 20 years, and we didn't always agree on the nursing home, but his passion and, like you said, Chris, his caring for his wife was simply amazing. So just wanted to reiterate that. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further communication, we will move on to approval of the minutes. There was one correction provided to the original minutes that were in the packet, and the correction was just changing one word. It was a typo, so that has been corrected in the version that will be approved. Mr. Esri? Yeah, okay. Mr. Esri's making the motion? Mr. Rosales?
Yeah, the correction would be on page 71 of your packet. Right down towards the bottom, basically the big paragraph right above the yays, a red mark on the CAFR. It should actually be CAFR, standing for Comprehensive Annual Financial Review. So I caught that, and I'd already brought it forward to Angie Patton's, brought it forward to her and let her know that it was there, and they've got it corrected.
Okay, any further corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, those in favor? Those opposed? Okay, motion carries. We've moved litigation committee items to the back, so now we're at standing committees. The summary of action taken on February the 4th, 2020 meeting of the County Facilities Committee is accepted and placed on file. The summary of action taken on February the 6th, 2020 meeting for Environment and Land Use is accepted and placed on file. Would the elect chair make the committee's recommendation regarding item 1?
Yes, thank you. And before I read, I'll just note that you have a corrected resolution at your desk. It's on white. I move the adoption of resolution number 2020-47, approving contract for sale of county property located at 1101 Carroll Avenue, Urbana.
Second by Mr. Summers. Any discussion on this item? Mr. Esri?
I'll just speak briefly to this. This isn't, the last appraisal we had on this property was $20,000, but it's just been sitting here. We had an offer to buy the property, as you can see, I believe it's in the notes, for $22,000. And there has also been maybe some question about with the land bank. The land bank director has basically said if you can get it sold at this point in time, go ahead and sell it. I mean, if you want to sell it for that price. There's no doubt that if we didn't sell it, it would go into the land bank, but he has no problem with us going ahead and selling it, and if we decide to. Those are, I guess, the biggest things. This is one of the properties that we tore down, the existing structure, and now right now it's just a clear lot. If we do hold on to it, of course, we're maintaining it by mowing it, and not that we're doing the absolute best job, but Dana Brenner and his staff are, keeping it knocked down for the most part. So just throwing that out there. It's ideally, I guess, we could get more money for it. I think we would all agree with that, but it's an offer.
Further discussion? Okay, those in favor of the motion? Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Would the elect chair make a committee's recommendation regarding item number 2?
Yes, thank you. I move adoption of ordinance number 2020-1, amending zoning ordinance, zoning case 945-AT-19, and we'll note that it's requested for a roll call, but with just 12 votes, or a minimum majority, simple majority to pass.
This is a zoning ordinance that requires 12. Mr. Patterson? The zoning ordinance requires 12 votes, regardless of what the quorum is.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, 10 is a quorum tonight, but it requires 12 for this one. Okay. Any further discussion about this one? Mr. Thorsland.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. There's 2 of these before us tonight. 945 and 946 are identical cases except for one difference. They both add all the extra notice that the municipalities have requested. There's longer comment periods. There's provisions to make sure that everyone is communicated well with if a proposed solar farm comes into their area. The difference is one provides a buffer of 1/2 mile and the other 1 1/2 miles. You heard the mayor, and we've heard some letters from municipalities who of course prefer the much greater distance of 1 1/2 miles. I want to thank the staff of the Planning and Zoning for providing everyone with a map that sort of explains this in a much better way than I can explain it. Verbally, it's the one with the light blue and the yellow, and of course the little pink parts that are solar farms that are proposed. You can see the one in St. Joe is in the 1/2 mile, and there was waivers granted for that. I want to focus on sort of the thrust of most municipalities, which is well summed up in just this one paragraph from Rantoul that I'll read again. The village of Rantoul is very much interested in the direction Champaign County takes in regards to the county zoning regulation of solar farms and other uses within 1 1/2 miles of village limits. The village of Rantoul has adopted a comprehensive plan, and with that plan and our own zoning authority, we desire as much influence and control over zoning in the 1 1/2 mile extraterritorial jurisdictional area around our village corporate limits as we can possibly have. Well, of course they do. I would love to have zoning jurisdiction over my neighbor's backyard too, because I'd like to make my garage bigger. What we have to understand, and I have land in a 1 1/2 mile ETJ of Mahomet, farm ground, that I'd love to have a proposed solar farm on. Despite the fact that I'm not invited into the library, serviced by the police, have sewer or water from the village of Mahomet, if I were to subdivide that land or have a solar farm proposed and this particular ordinance doesn't pass and the other one does, then I would have to go through extra steps and extra cost to subdivide or do anything else. Dealing with people that I'm not allowed to vote for or vote against, people who do not provide me with any services. As a farmer, and I am still a farmer, I still have farm ground even though I'm in town now, I would love to have guaranteed income from a 20-year lease on a solar farm. One of the interesting parts is Joan Dykstra did a much better job in her letter of sort of dancing on the fence about this issue. She said basically the same thing as Rantoul. We want control over that, but she did it in a much more diplomatic way. She was able to sort of walk on that fence much better than Rantoul. But just keep in mind, the fence she wants to walk on is 1.5 miles from the border of Savoy. We see the numbers that John provided. 1/2 mile separation means 111.42 square miles of the county that is our jurisdiction, that we're here to represent. We give willingly some control or exclusion to the municipalities that they're next to. That leaves us 81.7% of the county, and this is a wonderful map, and I thank them. That's 111 square miles around municipalities that total only 70.8 square miles. If we give them 1.5 square miles, that number of square miles or 1.5 mile separation jumps up to 367 square miles of land that we abdicate responsibility for representing. And we allow the municipality that provides no services to have say over what they may do in the future. I have a radical approach to the 1.5 miles. I think your jurisdiction ends where your sewer lines do. I agree that that's not an acceptable position, and I'm corrected often on that. I think that the LRMP states that we should work with communities, intergovernmental agreements to try to get along better, and that 1/2 mile is a reflection of the goals of the LRMP. One of the other things that's important in the LRMP is we have a goal that goes towards energy efficiency and environmental protection. Solar farms are much different than wind farms. They're quiet at night. They're not very high off the ground. They provide income to farmers who may have, especially in these times, trouble with steady income. And they provide energy that doesn't produce any pollution. There's some question about reclamation when they're done, and we addressed all that in the ordinance already. The last thing that I thought about is what are these called? Solar farms. We have in Illinois a right to farm act. We have one in Champaign County. We've talked about it with the cannabis ordinance, that we might be violating the right to farm act if we prohibit cannabis growers in the unincorporated areas of Champaign County. Harvesting the sun for energy is the same thing that corn and soybeans do. This is a farm. And I think that the people, if they're approached by a solar farm who are in this 1.5 miles, but more than a half mile, should have the opportunity to let us, the people elected to serve them, make a decision that helps them further perhaps save their farm for the future. I'm not in support of 945. I am in support, of 946, but I am in support of this measure, 945, that keeps that distance to 1/2 mile. Thank you.
Ms. Furtado.
I'd like to echo my colleague's sentiments. There's been no issue that I've spent more time listening to or learning about than solar farms in the past, I don't know, maybe year that I've been on the county board. And I have to admit, I've really actually enjoyed it because there's probably few issues that animate the motivations and the values that I hold, the reason that I want to be a part of this body, as much as the ability to create the opportunity to create sustainable energy infrastructure in our county. There is no issue that I have heard more about from organized labor than that of the support of the solar farms. Solar farms have the potential to be a growth for us in terms of decent paying jobs for residents of our county. It also has the opportunity for us to build a more sustainable energy grid for our county and for us to become a leader on this issue, not just in Illinois, but in the Midwest. These are complicated issues that we've been asked to address. Balancing the very real concerns of municipalities with the very real rights of property owners. And I just would like to say that we passed this resolution, the original resolution, after a lot of thought and a lot of debate. And for us to revisit it so soon when there has yet to really be an issue is alarming. That said, I do think that the first ordinance is a compromise with the municipalities that have expressed concerns because it does give them more time to review the documents, to review the plans that are before this body, and to weigh in on those plans. And of course, those considerations would be kept in mind as we take any vote or decision. But to totally give up the 1.5 mile jurisdiction, said, leaving people in that space and as to the authority, the ability to have representation in what they do with their own property, especially weighed against the importance of the potential job growth and the potential green energy growth. To me, this is the kind of that is very core to me. It is very core to the constituents I represent in my district. It is very core to the constituents that I think we represent as a county. I think that it would be a mistake to limit the opportunity to solar growth. And let me be clear, the second resolution does that. I very much support the first resolution. I also want to be clear, if we do not vote for the first, if both of these resolutions fail tonight, if you decide not to vote for the first resolution, the additional time for the municipalities in order to weigh in on this process will also not be amended to the resolution. So as you're considering your vote, I really urge everyone on this board to consider the first proposal.
Mr. Esri.
Yes, thank you. First thing I wanted to say is the reason we have both ordinances amendments, zoning ordinance amendments before us is because at ELUC, they were both a tie, which, as I've explained before, we've had it happen before. Board rules state, in the instance of a tie, they advance, but with no recommendation from the committee as a whole. So they both passed 3-3. There were 6 of us, ELUC committee members present. So over and above that, 945 versus 946. 946 would prohibit solar farms within 1.5 miles. Yes, that prohibit is in quotation marks because we still have the authority to grant waivers, variances. We've already done that at 1 mile, at the 1/2 mile. The zoning is still ours up to the actual limit of any incorporated village, municipality, whatever. To extend it out to the 1.5 miles would make it more consistent with the rest of the zoning. If you build a building, I have a neighbor who built a farm shop, I don't know, it's probably, time flies, probably been 5 years ago now, within 1.5 miles of Urbana, and he had to conform to Urbana's zoning because he's within that 1.5 miles. Now, had he been 100 feet outside of that, he's the county zoning, which in essence is for sure a lot more lax. He had to haul in dirt to bring up the truckloads of dirt to bring up the height of that lot where he was building his shed and everything else. So the idea that we're going to abdicate our ability if we extend it out to the 1.5 miles is wrong in my book. Is giving the villages what they want. The villages, as is the case with the county, the villages ultimately have more population than the truly rural areas. I'm saying this, I'm in favor, I will not be voting for 945, I'll be voting in favor of 946. When we had the votes on the solar farms, I voted for them, despite the fact that the villages did not want them generally. I know St. Joe didn't. Tammy probably wasn't real happy with me when I voted for them. We can grant variances. The idea that the 1.5 miles would maybe chase away a solar farm. If that person, that company that would potentially be proposing a solar farm looks at Champaign County and let's say we have the 1.5 miles in place. Oh, I have a perfect spot, but it's within that 1.5 miles. Forget it. I'm not going to go forward with it. Well, if that's what they would want to do, so be it. To me, that would say that that's probably not a very good proposal anyway. Because if it's a really good proposal, if you're really behind it, hey, this is the prime piece of real estate for a solar farm, and let's say it's right up on the village limit of, say, St. Joe. If you really and truly believe that, aren't you going to fight for it? And if you're a corporation like that and you don't know that you could ask for a variance or going to check and see if you can ask for a variance, would you not be lax in doing your homework? Would it be guaranteed? No, of course not. But the idea that we're giving up any kind of zoning to me is wrong. It's still the county's. It's still our decision. To work with the villages that are requesting this, I don't have a problem with it. The idea that, okay, we did grant all these variances for which are indicated by the red. We voted 1 down out of 7. So we approved 6. The idea that we're just going to rubber stamp them, no, I don't think we are, because we turned 1 down and the votes weren't always the same, I don't believe, on the ones that we did approve. And this county board, the makeup now, okay, let's say maybe now with the makeup of the county board, we're going to quote unquote rubber stamp them. But later on, this board can change. it's very likely going to change later this year. So the people that get on then, who knows what their thoughts are. So the idea of 1.5 miles, to me, extending it out, with that being the only difference between the two, I'll go for the 1.5 miles. I don't have a problem with it. I don't see it truly abdicating our role in the process, because it doesn't. We aren't saying the it's still going to go through the ZBA and then to us. It's not going to just go, oh, it's within 1.5 miles of St. Joe, it's going to go before the St. Joe Village Board. Nope, that's not what's going to happen. It's going to go through the same process as any of the other ones that we've already approved. So I will not be supporting 945. I will be supporting 946. Thank you.
Mr. Harper.
I'm in agreement with Mr. Esri. I'm not going to take that. For me, in the rural area, we have to work with these small communities. We all know that small communities struggle for their growth, for tax dollars to keep everything running. I talked to Tammy a lot about this. As you know, I voted against the large farm at Sydney. I'm a farm ground guy, but I believe in individual owners' rights, but also you have to work with these small towns. It's part of our community out there. I voted for the one that was approved in St. Joe only after discussions with the mayor of St. Joe and people around there, because where that was being put, the St. Joe Sportsman's Club is right next to it. Well, on Wednesday nights, they have trap shoots out there, so I really don't want to build a house there, so I see a few people in here that shoot, and I'm not sure they shoot very straight. So, but he's back there on his phone. He's not listening to me. But anyway, I will support 946. This is, Mr. Editor said, all this will come up if with variances as we go along, but I'm not going to take that 1.5 mile from my communities in my area, which I have St. Joe, I have Ogden, I have Royal, I have Sydney, I have Philo, I have Homer, Broadlands and Longview. I want those residents to tell me what they want in their areas, and then we can work on it from there.
Mr. Ingram.
I think Mr. Esri and Mr. Harper both put up solid points there, and I'm glad to hear from them as this area is more germane to their districts. I do recall the advocation from Mr. Esri of previous projects, I think with the support of farmers who wanted to do what they wanted to do with their land, and I think that's pretty important. Thinking about my own brief stints around farms as a kid, anybody telling anybody 1.5 miles outside of Rossville what they should do, I feel like would have probably suffered a pretty heavy wrath. The point about the shed outside of Urbana, I think you seem to me, you're making the case that 45 is better because there was too much fussing from the city on the person who you're talking about building this shed. That's what that sounded like to me, that they had too much of a hand in it when they shouldn't have. And balancing the desires of smaller municipalities versus what we're here to do, I think is tough, but it's also important. I think Mr. Thorsland's point about the people who would be interfered with not having any real way to make an impact on a vote on somebody who might make that decision is also an important factor. You know, you said that we might have a new board with new visions on this, but those municipalities might also have new mayors and new councils with their own new visions on this. We have to decide it right now because we're who's here. So to me, 45 seems a wiser course, as it does increase the notice. It does allow us to talk to people about these things a little bit more than perhaps they felt like they've been getting before, but also doesn't go so far out of the municipality's boundaries to make me feel a little bit awkward about telling somebody who lives, again, 1.4 miles away, who might want to, in this time of having a hell of a time even being a farmer, be looking for some sort of other out. Knowing some of my farming relatives who would also be very excited to have or to entertain offers like this, if they had to go through extra hurdles, I'm not entirely sure what that would look like. So, from my understanding and looking at even at just this map and how much we would be talking about, I mean, if you want to use the word abdicating or just, interfering in, that wasn't a particularly persuasive argument for me, I guess. I would prefer 45 in this particular case. Thanks.
Mr. McGuire.
Thank you. As someone who lives in the city but has a largely rural area, and to touch on some of the issues that we've talked about tonight. First, I don't think the 1.5 miles will stop a solar farm from going in anywhere in the county. Second, the fact that we're changing this policy, I thought it was kind of under change ever since we started. Even some of the solar panel farms themselves we changed as they were brought to us. The other thing is that I didn't realize that 1.5 miles wasn't in there, because that has been something of a policy since I've been on the board for any other issue around the cities. The area where I live has a lot of farmland within a half a block from where I live, for the city of Champaign. And how these communities move and change to have 1,800 acres of solar panels that close or right in the middle of where Southwest Champaign is, probably would be something they would really want to have a discussion about. I don't understand why, it's about having good neighbors and understanding where everybody's going to be at and having an opportunity to have that discussion 5 years out or 6 years out, and know what's going to happen, and to have the county be able to discuss those things with Champaign-Urbana or Mahomet with the county before we decide to change the direction of the city of Urbana or Champaign for 30 or 40 years. And it's been the policy. I don't know why we wouldn't want to have an ordinance that followed past practice for that reason. And I'm not sure how many more solar panels we're going to put in this county, but I think we should maintain the same policy we've had in the past.
Okay, Mr. Summers.
As a county board member, I want to support development of solar farms in Champaign County. I'm disinclined to pass any ordinance that will provide another hurdle for folks to come in and engage in economic development in Champaign County. So I will be supporting 945.
Okay, Mr. Rector.
I need Aaron or John Hall to help me on this, because when all this work was happening, whether it was Sean or Tammy or John Rector or everybody, somehow we all had it in our mind that it was 1.5 miles. And then all of a sudden the ordinance happens and it's like, well, it's a 1/2 mile. The only way we can change it is to redo it. But I had it in my mind, and I think a lot of people in this room had it in their mind, that the ordinance was going to be for 1.5 miles. And then all of a sudden it's a 1/2 mile, because everything else that you said is 1.5 miles. So I'm trying to go back to that part.
Mr. Esri.
Yeah, if I may. John, you can correct me if I'm wrong by just a shake of the head, but I believe all along it's been a 1/2 mile, correct? Or maybe it'd be best to have Mr. Hall. But if you had that in your mind, when we actually took the vote on it anyway, it's always been the 1/2 mile when it got down right to the brass tacks for the solar farms. Go ahead.
It is confusing the way the ordinance is written currently, right now, if you're going to propose a solar farm less than 1.5 miles from a municipality, there's a series of conditions that apply. One of those is that it be at least 0.5 mile away. So we sort of have a combination right now. We say if it's going to be less than 1.5 miles, it has to be at least 0.5 mile. But these are special use permit standard conditions, and they are subject to waiver. So in fact, you can ask for a waiver of less than 0.5 mile. To do less than 1.5 miles right now and more than 0.5 mile is not a waiver. You just have to meet conditions. If you ask for a waiver, the county board may approve less than 0.5 mile, which it has done in roughly 5 cases. It disapproved 1. So it is confusing, I agree. We still honor that 1.5 miles in the current ordinance, just not as strongly as what the villages would like to see.
So I understand it better. I understand it better now. But then what throws me is immediately after we pass this ordinance, I'm talking to Tammy, I'm talking to Sean, I'm talking to Joan. They, in my mind, they didn't understand what was going on, or they would have stepped up earlier and fought it. I mean, I don't see what's wrong with us changing this to 1.5 miles. I didn't like it in the beginning, and we talked and we said, well, we just have to change it. So we're here to change it. We have Rantoul, Savoy, Mahomet, St. Joe asking us to change it. And the way we're all talking now, it's going to be another partisan thing, and we're not even going to do the right thing, what these communities are asking us to do. Thank you.
Mr. Patterson.
Actually, a few questions for John.
Hey, stay
I
at the
waited until
microphone,
you got
John.
as far as you could. Sorry. What happens if both of these pass?
My view is if they are passed in the order they're presented, 946 would be the last amendment, and where 946 differs from 945, it would actually override 945.
Okay. And outside of the distance between the village, both of them have identical additions that relate to early notification or extended notification process for the villages to give them a longer time to express their positions on it. Okay. I guess basically what I'm trying to get to is that I think that everybody here agrees on the notification aspects of this. Clearly, we don't agree on the 1.5 miles versus a 0.5 mile. Right now, the current policy is a 0.5 mile. So if both of these are defeated tonight, we don't add any additional notification process to our ordinance, and it remains a 0.5 mile. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you support extending it to 1.5 miles, I'd encourage you to vote for both ordinances, because if both of them get defeated, we don't create any more access or any more more enhanced notification to the villages. So just wanted to put that out there. And I will say, I don't think the word partisan is appropriate if everybody on your side is expressing the same position. So
Mr. Harper.
I'm going back to what Mr. Rector brought up, and before I was ever on the county board, everything was 1.5 miles of the municipalities. Why in the hell was it changed to a 0.5 mile just because the solar farms wanted it? Why didn't they have, okay, you got 1.5 miles, you come in and you work it out with the village and the county if you want to come within that 1.5 miles. So we put this one in at a 0.5 mile, and it's my fault. I didn't catch it, just like John said, we didn't catch it. It's been 1.5 miles for everything else for these towns. Why did one solar farm outfit from California come in here and say, oh, we're going to be within a 0.5 mile town? I don't know why it was ever changed to begin with.
Did you want to say something, Ms. Heisman?
I was in for 946, and the biggest thing is I represent Mahomet, and their mayor is wanting this 1.5 miles, and I do want to work with all of the communities. I've said that from the beginning, but I want to speak specifically about Mahomet and Rantoul. I graduated from Rantoul when Chanute Air Force Base closed in '93. The economic status of Rantoul has declined drastically, and so I am super excited that they are breaking ground, like just a few, or the spring, they're going to break ground for this new sports complex coming in right outside of town. And so my fear is if we don't give them 1.5 miles, and it would just be a 0.5 mile because I've traveled to these sports complexes across the state, and then hotels are going to come in, restaurants are going to come in, and even outlet malls pop up because when you have traveling teams and you're staying there, it's a huge economic boost. And so my fear is, what if we do just a 0.5 mile, that could slow their growth down. And there's a town that has not been growing for 27 years. Finally, there's this exciting thing coming in. And so we can sit in St. Joe, they can say, oh, it hasn't grown in 10 years. You don't know what's down the line. And so I'm just saying, and Mahomet is growing north, south, east, west, faster than the schools can even keep up. So I'm just, those two communities have exciting things happening. And so to not allow them to be able to be able to work and have more input and say doesn't feel fair to their village and what they're doing right there. And that's what they're there for. And so for us to sit here and say, yes, is it good for Champaign County? Yes. And can you bet your bottom dollar that multi-million-dollar companies that are building these solar farms, if they want to build it there, they're not going to work with them. And like Aaron said, we've granted waivers over and over again. And so it's not like the solar farms aren't going to be able to come in. They can still come in. It's just saying with 1.5 miles, and if it's less than 1.5 miles, then you need a special waiver. So then it's still going to come to the ZBA and to us. No one's saying no to solar farms. No one's saying no to Champaign County having them. It's just giving the village that is doing all that they can to try to grow and keep their economy going too, giving them, we just would be working with them. We have four communities that have sent us letters and are asking them to work with them. And that I'm just saying, let's work with them. I don't know why we wouldn't.
John, do you want to say something?
I'll try to be helpful with the request of Mr. Harper. There's only one use in the Champaign County zoning ordinance that is prohibited within 1.5 miles of a municipality, and that's wind farms. And that's because it's a state law. There's no other use that has a preordained setback from a municipal boundary, period. Except for solar farms, which has the 0.5 mile. So I'm sorry if people have this recollection that we kept things 1.5 miles away from the municipalities. That just simply is not the case. The first instance of that was wind farms, and again, that was a state law. In fact, we added the 0.5 mile separation. That wasn't even at ELUC originally. We added that in the public hearing in response to all of the public outcry around Sydney. So it's customary for Champaign County to exercise its zoning jurisdiction up to the municipal boundary. And that's not a new thing. That's actually why Champaign County adopted zoning in the first place. So I don't know if that's helpful, Mr. Harper, but.
Mr. McGuire.
So anything that's from the city 1.5 miles out, does the city have an opportunity just to ask a question about what's zoned in that area? And that's really what I think the cities are asking about.
Well, they have protest rights on any rezoning. Anything that's going to be rezoned, they have a protest right. State law doesn't give them any protest rights on special use permits. We have always notified municipalities of special use permits, but many of them take the view, well, I don't have protest rights, so I'm not even going to bother to give you comments. I mean, that's the response we generally get. We very rarely get comments on special use permits. It doesn't happen very often. And, you know, many times I've seen the county board take the same view. If they don't have the right to say no, they usually don't even want to comment on something. And that's a reasonable perspective. But the few instances where we have gotten comments on special use permits at the zoning board, they generally have resulted in special conditions. So I think the zoning board does a good job, but state law doesn't give them the right to protest special use permits, so Champaign County can't give them that right either.
So when Curtis Road went in and all that got annexed in by the city, they had control over what was happening now. And how did they do that?
Well, they get control by annexing. If they don't annex, they could have some control with an annexation agreement, but we don't see that a lot. For something like Curtis Road, they want that development inside their boundaries so they can get tax dollars. They want to be able to control it, guide future development. That makes sense, but only if they annex it.
Mr. Clemens?
Of all the projects that you've been over with the county that required special use permits, how many projects has it stopped when somebody found out, I got to get a special use permit, I'm done, I'm walking away without even trying? Probably none.
I can't think of one, honestly.
Okay.
Mr. Thorson?
Yeah, thank you, John, for explaining some things. I spent a little time on the zoning board, a decade, and I was chair for 8 of that. And John's correct. The municipalities were always notified. I can think of a handful of times they had something to say on a special use permit. Generally, no comment was received from the fire district, the municipal area associated with things. And John makes a very good point, and Jim, you helped with that with Curtis Road.